Ladies and gentlemen, Millionaire invites her black maid son to play chess as a joke. She didn't know. He was a child genius. Come here, boy. How about showing me how you play chess in the slums? Mrs. Victoria Whitman's voice echoed through the living room of her Beverly Hills mansion, laden with arrogance typical of someone who has never had to earn anything on her own. Diego Santos, 17, was helping his mother Carmen serve guests at a charity dinner. When the millionaire decided to make him the evening's entertainment, the other guests, businessmen, politicians, and their bored wives laughed discreetly behind their 1,000 champagne glasses. Victoria had organized the event to raise funds for underprivileged youth, but clearly she hadn't expected to have one of them serving canapes in her own home. The irony was delicious to her. I bet he can at least move the pieces. Victoria continued gesturing toward the Italian chessboard that decorated the coffee table. It'll be fun to see what this boy can do against someone who's actually studied the game. Mr. Hamilton, owner of 3 hotel chains, whispered to his wife, I bet he doesn't even know the knight moves in an L shape. Laughter spread through the room like waves on a lake of superiority. Diego's mother Carmen lowered her eyes and clenched her fist around the silver tray. 20 years, cleaning that house, raising her son alone on a maid's salary, and she still had to watch her boss use her boy as a joke to impress her rich friends. She had known Victoria since she was young. She had seen the woman transform from a spoiled Aries into a cruel socialite over the years. Carmen, you can stop serving for a few minutes, Victoria ordered with false kindness. I want you to watch your son play. It will be educational for both of you. Diego, however, remained motionless for a few seconds, his dark eyes analyzing not only the board but every face in the room. At 17, he had already learned that silence often reveals more about people than 1,000 words, and at that moment what he saw was a group of privileged adults who had no idea who they were dealing with. There was something about Diego's posture that made some of the guests stop laughing, a strange stillness, like the calm before the storm. His fingers moved unconsciously, as if he were visualizing moves on an invisible board. Of course, Mrs. Whitman, Diego replied with a calmness that made some of the guests exchange curious glances. It will be my pleasure. Victoria smiled with satisfaction, settling into the leather armchair like a queen preparing to watch gladiators. Excellent. I bet you've never played on a board like this, have you? Genuine Italian marble, each piece worth more than well you know. State Representative Jennifer Mills, sitting near the window, commented aloud, Victoria, are you sure this isn't cruel? The poor boy is going to be humiliated. Nonsense, Victoria retorted, adjusting her diamond earrings. It's a learning opportunity. He'll tell his friends he played chess in a real mansion. What Victoria Whitman didn't know, and would find out in the worst possible way, was that this slum kid had spent the last 8 years studying every opening, every strategy, every trap the grandmasters had ever devised. While his schoolmates played video games, Diego devoured chess books borrowed from public library and watched legendary matches on the broken computer. He had managed to fix himself in the silent early hours of the morning when Carmen worked double shifts cleaning. Diego analyzed games by Kasparov, Pfizer, and Carlsen. He had memorized more than 200 different openings and could recite the 50 most famous defenses in chess history by heart. But most importantly, she had no idea that she was about to be humiliated by the same boy she had underestimated out of pure prejudice in front of all her powerful friends. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a chess defeat, it would be a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. While Victoria arranged the pieces with theatrical movements, Diego watched each guest. Something in his eyes suggested that he wasn't just preparing for a game, he was preparing to rewrite every assumption in that room about who really deserved respect. If this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next showed that judging someone by their appearance can be the most expensive mistake a person makes in their life. Victoria took her place on white side with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything important in her life. I always play white, dear. It's a family tradition, she said, completely ignoring the fact that in serious chess, the color of the pieces is decided by drawing lots. Diego nodded silently and arranged his black pieces with a precision that made Mr. Hamilton frown. Each piece was placed exactly in the center of its square, perfectly aligned, as if that Italian marble board were just one of the hundreds he had faced before. "Let's make this interesting," Victoria announced to the guests. "If the boy manages to give me even one scare, I'll donate $1.00 to I don't know some public school." Laughter echoed through the room again, but this time Diego looked up and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that smile. It was the same one Diego had as a child, whenever someone underestimated him in school competitions, the same smile he had used at 12 when he said he no longer needed her help with his math homework. Victoria opened the game with a conservative pawn move e4 Indian king dear, a classic opening we learned at Harvard. She explained condescendingly, as if she were teaching a child to tie his shoes. Diego responded instantly. C5, the Sicilian defense. An awkward silence filled the room. That wasn't the move of someone who might know how to move the pieces. It was the response of someone who knew theory. "Interesting," murmured Congresswoman Mills, leaning forward. Victoria hesitated for 3 seconds, long enough for Diego to realize that she had memorized half a dozen openings but didn't really understand the principles behind them. She played an F3 following a pattern she had probably learned at some social club. While Victoria thought about her next move, Diego allowed himself a brief trip down memory lane. 8 years earlier, when he was only 9, he had found a torn chess book in the library trash. He had taken it home hidden in his backpack and asked Carmen to teach him the basic rules. "Midge, why do you want to learn that?" His mother had asked, exhausted after a double shift, cleaning to be like the rich kid's mom. "They always say they're smarter than us." At that time, Carmen earned only $600 a month. There was no money for lessons, for a computer, for anything, but there was the public library, which became Diego's second home. Every day after school, he walked 3 km to study historical games in dusty books that no one else touched. Victoria finally played D3, a timid move that revealed her conservative nature in chess and in life. She preferred safe control positions where social class could guarantee victory. Diego responded with NC6, developing with purpose. Each of his moves was executed in less than 5 seconds, as if he were following a mental script he had memorized years ago. "Our little boy is moving too fast," Victoria commented to the guests. "In real chess, you think before you play." It was then that Diego made his first psychological mistake. He paused, pretended to think deeply for 15 seconds, and played G6, preparing the bishop's fianchetto. It was a move that any beginner would make instinctively, but it was actually part of a complex strategic plan that would take 10 more moves to reveal itself. "Ah, you see." Victoria turned triumphantly to the guests. "He doesn't have the patience to think typical," but Mr. Hamilton, who had played chess at university 40 years ago, recognized the pattern. "Victoria, this boy is setting up a fast dragon." "A what?" she replied, annoyed at being interrupted during her demonstration of superiority. "It's a variation of the Sicilian, quite sophisticated." Victoria looked at the board with a new tension in her shoulders. Nonsense. He must have seen it in a movie. But as the moves progressed, something unsettling began to take shape. Diego wasn't just responding to her moves, he was dictating the pace of the game. Every piece he developed occupied exactly the right square, creating a harmony that transformed the board into something resembling a visual symphony. Carmen watched from the corner of the room, her heart racing. She knew Diego was good, but she had never seen him play against someone who took himself so seriously. And for the first time in 20 years of working in that house, she saw fear in Victoria Whitman's eyes, the fear of discovering that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as special as she had always believed. Each new humiliation Victoria tried to impose only fed something inside Diego that she couldn't see, a silent strength being strengthened by the very injustice she was trying to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was signing her own sentence, written on the 64 squares of that board that would soon become the stage. One of the greatest humiliations in the social history of Beverly Hills, Diego's 10th move revealed something that made Mr. Hamilton choke on his whiskey. The boy had sacrificed upon in a seemingly innocent move, but any experienced player would recognize the deadly trap that was being set. Victoria. Hamilton whispered urgently, "This boy is no amateur." But Victoria was too determined to prove her superiority to listen to warnings. Relax, dear. He must have memorized a few moves from the internet. I'll be done with this in 5 minutes. That's when Diego did something unexpected. He calmly rose from his chair and walked over to Carmen, who was watching everything from the corner of the room with her hands clasped together. Mom, he said in a low voice that echoed through the tense silence of the room. Remember when you said that one day I would show these people who we really are? Carmen nodded, her eyes shining with tears. She remembered perfectly. It was the day Diego turned 15, and she didn't even have enough money for a cake. He had found his mother crying in the kitchen of their small house and promised her that one day he would change everything. That boy has more class than all of us put together. Congresswoman Mills murmured to her husband, watching the interaction between mother and son. Victoria tapped her fingers impatiently on the table. Can we continue the game? I have other commitments today. Diego returned to the board, but something had changed in his demeanor. He was no longer the shy teenager who had been invited for entertainment. He was a young man who carried years of sacrifice, secret studies, and a determination forged in adversity on his shoulders. Diego's 11th move was executed with surgical precision that made Victoria frown. For the first time, he had created a double threat. If she protected the king, she would lose her queen. If she protected the queen, she would be checkmated in 3 moves. That's not possible. Victoria muttered, studying the board intently for the first time since the match began. That's when Hamilton realized something crucial. Victoria, you're being outplayed by a kid who's probably never set foot in a formal chess club in his life. While Victoria tried to find a way out of her dilemma, Diego took the opportunity to observe every face in the room. Congresswoman Mills had stopped drinking champagne and was leaning forward. Fascinated, the hotel chain owner had put his cell phone aside. Even Hamilton's wife, who had been leafing through a fashion magazine, was now paying full attention to the game. Carmen knew that look on her son's face. It was the same one he had at 12 when he discovered the chess section at the public library, the same look he had for 5 hours straight studying historical games on a slow broken computer, the same look that made him wake up at 5:00 in the morning to solve tactical problems before going to school. Victoria finally made a move, a desperate attempt to escape the trap, but it was too late. Diego had calculated that possibility 6 moves ago. Check, he said, simply moving his queen to a position that offered 3 different winning continuations. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria looked at the board, then at Diego, then back at the board. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from a contained rage at the realization that she was being systematically destroyed by someone she considered inferior. You must have seen that sequence somewhere. She said, her voice higher than normal. No one learns that on their own. Diego smiled for the first time since the match began. You're right, ma'am. I learned it from Garry Kasparov. Kasparov taught you? Hamilton asked incredulously. Not personally. Diego replied, moving a piece to what was clearly the final move. But I studied all his documented games, 183 to be exact. He used this particular sequence against Karpov in 1984, Game 23 of the World Championship. Victoria looked around the room, searching the faces of the guests for support, but what she found was something she had never seen directed at her silent disapproval. For the first time in her life, the people around her were not impressed by her performance. Carmen stepped forward, her voice firm and clear. My son woke up every day at 5 in the morning to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the public library because we couldn't afford internet when I worked double shifts. He stayed up all night solving chess problems by candlelight because our electricity was cut off. The room was completely silent. Now Diego looked at his mother with a mixture of love and determination that made some of those present look away. Ashamed. Checkmate, Diego said softly, placing his queen in the final position. Victoria stared at the board for a long moment, as if expecting the pieces to change positions on their own. When she finally looked up, she found Diego watching her with the same unruffled calm with which he had begun the game, but now something had completely changed in the dynamics of the room. The guests no longer looked at Diego as entertainment. They looked at him as someone who had just rewritten all their assumptions about talent, class, and merit. And they looked at Victoria with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment she had never experienced before. What Victoria Whitman didn't know yet was that this defeat on the board would be only the first move in a much larger game that was about to begin, a game where all the social rules she had always taken for granted would be questioned, and where the boy she had underestimated would prove that true nobility has nothing to do with surnames or Bank accounts. Victoria stared at the board for 15 seconds that seemed like an eternity. Her trembling fingers touched the fallen king, as if they could magically undo the checkmate. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the $15.00 wall clock. That was luck, she muttered, her voice trembling.